Hey everyone, this is a piece by a person whose name believe is Gabriele Mastrolillo. I believe that's their name. I think they're Italian. Italian. Um, uh, but yeah. The piece is titled The Comintern Seen by the International Trotskyist Movement. And the abstract says, this article aims to analyze how the international communist movement dealt with the Comintern. Up to 1933, the international Trotskyist opposition movement considered itself the Comintern left wing, an internal opposition aiming to halt the, quote, bureaucratic degenerative process, end quote, of the Comintern, and to bring the Comintern back on the, quote, right path, that of its first four Congresses. Instead, following Hitler's victory in 1933, the international Trotskyist movement decided to disown the Comintern due to its indirect responsibility in Hitler's rise to power and in the debacle of German communism. From then on, the international Trotskyist movement considered itself as a global communist network alternative to the, quote, Stalinized Comintern, an alternative that officially became the Fourth International in 1938. So, 1 second, actually. Where am I? Sorry, wanted to copy the title of this piece down. Forgive me. Okay. All right. The keywords: Communist International, Comintern; Lev D. Trotsky, International Trotskyist Movement; International Left Opposition; International Communist League; Fourth International. So here we go. Since 1930, the Comintern was challenged by two transnational movements, also referring to Marxism-Leninism: the International Union of Communist Opposition, Internationale Vereinigung der Kommunistischen Opposition, known as the International Right Opposition. Footnote: on its history, see especially Robert J. Alexander, The Right Opposition, the Lovestonites, and the International Communist Opposition of the 1930s, as well as Pierre Bruet, Histoire de l'Internationale Communiste, 1919 to 1943. End footnote. And the International Trotskyist Movement, initially known from 1930 to 1933 as International Left Opposition, Bolshevik-Leninists. ILO. Footnote: historiography on the International Trotskyist Movement is broader than that on the International Right Opposition. Related to the 30s, see Bruet, Histoire, I don't know if I'm saying that right, de l'Internationale Communiste, l'Opposition Internationale de Gauche dans le Comintern. In La Sentinelle, Jules Humbert Droz, Acte du colloque sur l'Internationale Communiste. So there's too much here. I'm just going to read the English ones. Robert J. Alexander, International Trotskyism, 1929 to 1985, a documented analysis of the movement. There's something by L. Lequen, Le Trotskyisme, une histoire sans fard. And the person who wrote this, Gabriele Mastrolillo, La Dissidenza Comunista Italiana, Trotsky e la origine della Quarta Internazionale, 1928 to 1938. End footnote. It was an unequal competition since neither of the two oppositionist movements, despite their ramifications in various countries of the world, but especially in Europe and America, had a membership and a political weight comparable to those of that, quote, global network of politics, end quote, from which they had split, the Communist International. Nevertheless, quote, orthodox communism did not underestimate the moves of the two, quote, heretical movements, especially those of the Trotskyist one, which was the most organized and prestigious of the two since it was led by its reference leader. Footnote. See Brouet's article, International Opposition in the Communist International, a global overview in International Newsletter of Communist Studies. End footnote. Therefore, this article aims to analyze how the Comintern was faced by the leadership of the international Trotskyist movement, namely Trotsky and the International Secretariat, which, unlike the right opposition, had the ambition to establish a new communist international since 1933. In this way, the Trotskyist movement placed itself directly and explicitly in competition with the Comintern. Instead, up to 1933, the ILO considered itself the Comintern left wing, an internal opposition which aimed to halt the, quote, bureaucratic degenerative process that, according to the Trotskyist movement, was taking place within the leadership of the Comintern, and to bring the Comintern back to the, quote, right way, that of the Comintern's first four World Congresses, which took place between 1919 and 1922, when Lenin was still alive and Trotsky is one of the main representatives of the Soviet government. As Pierre Brouet wrote, quote, an international opposition I define as being an opposition which is based on an international program and which carries on its activity, if not in all sections of the Comintern, at least in several, and aims to organize itself in all of them. Two oppositions fit this definition, the left opposition and the right opposition. The left opposition existed as a reality for 10 years. Footnote. Brouet considered 1923 as a year of birth when the Russian left opposition was established. End footnote. It functioned not only as a tendency at its beginning, but subsequently as a faction within the Comintern, and figured in all the important moments of the Comintern's history down to 1933. Born later, the right opposition was more of a federation of groups, did not always have a clear-cut position, and gradually disappeared, end quote. Pierre Brouet. International oppositions in the Communist International. Just a side note, I'm pretty sure that the left opposition, especially Trotsky, I'm not exactly sure about the finer details, so feel free to take what I say here with a grain of salt, but consistently emphasize their support of the banning of factions, and that the left opposition, the groups around Trotsky, the groups around people who were at the Declaration of the 46 and whatnot, were not a faction. So I don't know if the way that Brouet is describing them is consistent with how the left opposition described itself in the, at least the Russian left opposition. Anyway, new section. The International Trotskyist Movement as Comintern's internal opposition. As a consequence of the struggle within the Russian Communist Party, Bolshevik, factions which refer to those existing in that party emerged in most of the communist parties worldwide. Stalin's victory caused not only the expulsion of Trotsky and that of the left oppositionists from the Soviet Party, but indirectly, it also led to the expulsion of Trotsky and the left opposition supporters from communist parties abroad who formed independent groupings, like, to name but a few, the French Ligue Communiste Opposition, the U.S. Communist League of America Opposition, the Spanish Oposición Comunista de España, the German Vereinigte Linke Opposition der Kommunistischen Partei Deutschlands, and the Greek Archeo-Marxisti Organosi, or Archaeo-Marxist organization, named after its review, Archaeo-Marximismu. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I don't think I've ever tried to pronounce anything from Greek in my life. Anyway, moving on. Footnote, it says it was the ILO's biggest section due to its 2,000 members. I'm assuming that's referring to the Greek Trotskyist opposition. Anyway, the official foundation of the international left opposition took place in Paris during the so-called preliminary conference on the 6th of April 1930. A few delegates participated in this meeting, acting as representatives of the opposition groups, which had been formed within the Belgian, Czechoslovakian, French, German, Hungarian, Italian, Spanish, and U.S. communism. Footnote. Participants were Alfred Rosmer, or I don't know if this is Alfred Rosmer, parenthesis, André A. Giraud, end parenthesis, and Pierre Neville from France, Ademar Henwatt and Leon Lesoil from Belgium, Max Shachtman from the United States, Jan Franco from Czechoslovakia, Peri Giovanni Battaioli and Severino from Italy, Julian Gorkin from Spain, Oscar Zeipolt from Germany, Oben and Picas from the Jewish group inside the French Ligue Communiste, Karoli Silvasi from Hungary, President Rosmer Griot, Secretary Gerard Rosenthal. End footnote. Nobody from the Russian and the Greek opposition could participate. For this reason, that conference was in reality a technical meeting which just proclaimed the birth of the international left opposition and reformed the international secretariat provisionally created in the previous March and initially composed by Alfred Rosmer, Max Shachtman, and Trotsky's son, Leon Sedov. During the preliminary conference, the delegates wrote an open letter, Aux Prolétaires du Monde. It was a propaganda appeal that denounced the critical political and economic situation in the capitalistic countries, and especially the domestic crisis of both the Soviet regime and the Comintern caused by the policies of the Stalinist regime. Moreover, it presented the ILO as the only international Marxist-Leninist organization which addressed I quote, tous les communistes et ouvriers du monde, in order to gain their support and bring the Comintern back to the line of the Comintern's first 4 World Congresses. The international left opposition succeeded in fulfilling another conference in 3 years. The ILO's, the International Left Opposition's second conference, known as pre-conference because the Second International Left Opposition Congress was set up as a technical meeting in view of a real international conference, took place in Paris from the 4th to the 8th of February 1933 in the presence of Belgian, British, French, German, Greek, Italian, Russian, Spanish, Swedish, and U.S. delegates. Trotsky could not participate but wrote a paper, the international left opposition, its tasks and methods adopted by the ILO during the pre-conference. The main part of this document concerns the international left opposition's principles, divided into 11 points that clarify Trotsky's and therefore the independent left opposition's criticisms of the Soviet regime policies and indirectly of the line followed by the Comintern leadership. Quote, guilty of not contesting but rather supporting those policies. Namely, the line followed towards the Comintern in the years 1924 to 1928 and the Anglo-Russian Union Committee are condemned, together with the Stalinist theory of, quote, two-class, parenthesis, peasant and worker, and parenthesis, parties, end quote, and that of socialism in one country, quote, the theory of social fascism, end quote, and the Stalinist economic policy, quote, both in its stage of economic opportunism 1923 to 1928, as well as in its stage of economic adventurism in 1928 to 1932, end quote. I don't know if I said quote at the right time there, but I'll say the Stalinist economic policy, quote, both in its stage of economic opportunism from 1923 to 1928, as well in the Stalinist stage of economic adventurism 1928 to 1932, end quote. Moreover, quote, the formula of the, quote, democratic dictatorship of the proletariat and peasantry, end quote, as a separate regime distinguished from the dictatorship of the proletariat, end quote, is rejected, while the necessity to develop the, quote, party democracy and to condemn, quote, the Stalinist plebiscitary regime, end quote, are also pointed out. Both, quote, the permanent character of the proletarian revolution, end quote, and that, quote, of the Soviet state as a worker state, end quote, are also reaffirmed. The, quote, necessity of systematic communist work in the proletariat mass organizations, particularly on the reformist trade unions, end quote. Quote, the necessity to mobilize the masses under transitional slogans, corresponding to the concrete situation in each country, and particularly under democratic slogans, end quote. And, quote, the necessity of a developed united front policy, end quote. When I'm repeating something, it means it's in italics, if you don't know, are also highlighted. Last but not least, it is reiterated that the international left opposition considered itself the Comintern left wing, aiming, quote, to tear the banner of Bolshevism out of the hands of the usurping bureaucracy and return the Communist International to the principles of Marx and Lenin, end quote. Further, the pre-conference decided to send a telegram to the Comintern urging it to organize urgently the Comintern's 7th World Congress, parenthesis, in which also the international left opposition had to participate, end parenthesis, and to lay the groundwork for an international united front with the international left opposition, the Labor and Socialist International, LSI, the Profintern, and the International Federation of Trade Unions for common action against Nazism as well as for the defense of the Soviet Union. But Moscow did not answer the call. New section. Hitler's victory and the, quote, independentist turn, end quote. The appointment of Hitler as German Chancellor on the 30th of January 1933, after the electoral triumph of the National Socialist Party, Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, was an event that also marked a point of no return in the history of the international Trotskyist movement. Indirectly, in fact, the Communist Party of Germany, Kommunistische Partei Deutschlands, KPD, contributed to the success of the far right because, according to the Comintern guidelines, it termed the Social Democratic Party of Germany, Sozialdemokratische Partei Deutschlands, as social fascist and consequently, the KPD rejected the possibility of a communist socialist united front against Nazism. Thus, the KPD had given evidence of demagoguery and had underestimated the danger represented by the Nazi Party, whose victory was, according to Trotsky, the, quote, 4th of August, end quote, of Stalinism. Footnote. Oh shit, I fucked up. No footnote. Thus, the KPD had given evidence of demagoguery and had underestimated the danger represented by the Nazi Party, whose victory was, according to Trotsky, the quote, 4th of August of Stalinism, or rather, Stalinism's bankruptcy. I'm sorry, I was seeing if there's any footnotes here, but there's not. There is, but it's just a bunch of citations in French. As is known, the reference is to the 4th of August 1914, when the SPD voted for the war credits in the Reichstag. In this way, it implicitly approved the German military efforts, like other social democratic parties, such as the French one, Section Française de l'Internationale Ouvrière SFIO did. In this way, according to the Bolsheviks and European maximalists, the bankruptcy of the Second International happened because it was not able to avoid that social patriotic deviation. Footnote. See J. Verhey, The Spirit of 1914, Militarism, Myth, and Mobilization in Germany. End footnote. In this way, according to the Bolsheviks and wrong place to start. The absence of official reactions by the Comintern, which, quote, continue era per oltre un anno a negare la sconfitta, considerandola addirittura il pre-annuncio di una prossima vittoria comunista in Germania, end quote, as Antonio Moscato wrote, was what convinced Trotsky of the necessity to establish not only a new German Communist Party, but also a new international and new communist parties. As Trotsky stated in July 1933, the Third International had proved to be irredeemably compromised because it had subordinated the prospect of the world revolution to the Thermidorian interest of Moscow's bureaucrats. Consequently, quote, the left opposition ceases completely to feel and act as a, quote, opposition. The left opposition becomes an independent organization, clearing its own road. It now only builds its own fractions in the Social Democratic and Stalinist parties, but conducts independent work among non-party and unorganized workers. It creates its own bases of support in the trade unions, independently of the trade union policy of the Stalinist bureaucracy. It participates in elections under its own banner whenever favorable conditions for this obtain. In relation to reformist and centrist labor organizations, including the Stalinists, it is guided by the general principles of the United Front policy. In particular, it applies the policy of the United Front, especially in order to defend the USSR against external intervention and international counter-revolution. End quote. Trotsky. Is it necessary to build communist parties and an international anew? End footnote. From then on, the international left opposition officially became an international communist network alternative to the Comintern, which was considered at that point hopelessly subjugated to Stalinist bureaucracy and hence unable to correctly lead the global communism movement. Therefore, according to the international left opposition, it was necessary to replace the Comintern with a new international, the fourth. For this reason, it is possible to label this turn as, quote, independentist, end quote. Footnote. I do not know if anyone else before me named this turn in this way. I did not find this definition neither in historiography nor in contemporary papers. Well, I'm going to steal it. End footnote. However, it did not entail a change of judgment concerning the Soviet Union, which is still considered quote, malgré toutes les perversions bureaucratiques et une fausse politique économique, l'état de la socialisation de la terre, des fabriques, des usines et de la collectivisation de l'économie paysanne, as stated by the International Secretariat, end quote, as stated by the International Secretariat in a letter addressed to the International Left Opposition National Sections. It's not very helpful if you translate something and then you don't translate the quotes into English. In 1986, in an article published in Soviet Studies, John A. Getty, I think it's John Arch Getty, tried to explain why Trotsky promoted that turn. Getty wondered why, between the disownment of the German Communist Party and that of the Comintern, passed 4 months. Getty argued that between 1932 and 1933, secret contacts between Trotsky, Karl Radek, and some of Grigory Zinoviev's followers and other opponents to Stalin, the Lomonadze group, took place in order to try to create an international unified opposition. Wikipedia says, in the history of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the left-right bloc was a failed attempt of vocal opposition to the politics of forced collectivization of Joseph Stalin. Vissarion, Lomonadze, and Sergei Stirtsov were recognized as its leaders. The name is derived from the accusation in factionalism of the group created by joining of two groups, the one accused in, quote, this is a terrible Wikipedia, of right opportunism and allegedly headed by Stirtsov, and another one accused of, quote, leftism and, quote, half-Trotskyism, allegedly headed by Lomonadze. In Western literature, the case is known as the Stirtsov-Lomonadze affair. Back to the text. The scenario came to nothing due to the arrest of most opponents. At the same time, in two letters sent to the Soviet Party's Politburo in March and May 1933, Trotsky proposed to rejoin the Soviet Party due to the critical Soviet political situation and the German political catastrophe. According to Trotsky, indeed, this scenario should obligate both the Stalinists and the Trotskyists to appeal to the sense of responsibility in order to build political unity inside the Comintern and its sections. Consequently, the international left opposition had to be considered officially the Comintern left fraction. Trotsky's letter did not receive an answer, and this fact convinced Trotsky of the need of officially disavowing the Comintern and promoting the turn toward the Fourth International. That's very interesting. I'd like to read that article because generally it's discussed as if Trotsky threw his hands up at this moment, and then he's like, oh yeah, their policies of the policies of the third period led to this. We can't to the rise of Nazism. This is like the final nail in the coffin. But if this is actually true, that Trotsky did try to reach out one more time for their reappeal, that kind of changes the character of this, what Mastrolillo calls the independentist turn. It kind of changes the whole character of it. So I'm going to repeat that to myself just because when I listen to this, it'll remember it. According to Trotsky, indeed, this scenario should obligate both the Stalinists and the Trotskyists to appeal to the sense of responsibility in order to try to build political unity inside the Comintern and the Comintern sections. Consequently, the international left opposition had to be considered officially the Comintern left fraction. Trotsky's letters did not receive an answer, and this fact convinced Trotsky of the need of officially disavowing the Comintern and promoting the turn toward the Fourth International. Footnote. See J. Arch Getty's Trotsky in Exile, the Founding of the Fourth International, published in Soviet Studies in 1986. End footnote. Thomas Twist replied to J. Arch Getty in another article and argued that the 4 months between the two disownments depended on Trotsky's wish to avoid a split between his followers, a scenario that could be carried out due to the radicalism of the turn promoted. Moreover, Twist criticized Getty's interpretation of the letters sent by Trotsky to the Politburo. According to Thomas Twist, in fact, in these papers, Trotsky simply requested that the Comintern officially recognize as domestic fractions the international left opposition and its sections. Therefore, Trotsky chose to wait 4 months in case demands for the radical reform of the Comintern emerged from within that same organization. This scenario did not take place, and consequently, Trotsky decided to carry out that term. Footnote. See Thomas Twist's Trotsky's Break with the Comintern, a comment on J. Arch Getty. If you don't know, Thomas Twist is a Trotskyist. He wrote a book on Leninist theory of organization or something like that with Paul LeBlanc, who's a pretty well-known American Trotskyist, and wrote a book called Trotsky and the Soviet Bureaucracy, which I think covers Trotsky's attitudes to the Soviet bureaucracy up to 1936, but I'm not sure. Anyway, end footnote. The need to establish a new international was enunciated during the plenary meetings of the International Secretariat and the delegates of the main international labor organization. God, I keep fucking that up. I want to say international every time I see the I. Sorry. The need to establish a new international was enunciated during the plenary meeting of the International Secretariat and the delegates of the main international left opposition sections, which took place in Paris on the 19th to the 21st of August 1933, in the presence of the Belgian Georges Ferriken, the Czechoslovakian Jan Frankel, the Frenchman Pierre Franck and Raymond Moulinier, the German Erwin H. Ackerknecht, the Greek Mitsos Yotopoulos, the Italians Alfonso Leonetti and Pietro Tressa, and the Russian Sedov. In that session, they decided to approve the, quote, independentist turn, end quote, and rename the international left opposition to the International, parenthesis, or Internationalist, end parenthesis, Communist League, parenthesis, Bolshevik-Leninists, end parenthesis, ICL. For this reason, the 10th of the 11 points adopted during the pre-conference was modified, and its new version specified that the constitution of a new international was the main goal of the international Trotskyist movement. New section. From the Seventh World Congress of the Comintern to its dissolution, the turning towards the Popular Front's policy, which was carried out during the Seventh World Congress of the Comintern, Moscow, 25th of July to the 21st of August 1935, end parenthesis, caused another friction between the international Trotskyist movement and the Comintern. Due to the turn, Trotsky and the International Secretariat considered the Seventh World Congress the point of no return in the history of the Comintern itself. Its, quote, liquidation Congress, end quote, which had carried out a break, quote, with the last remnants of Comintern traditions, end quote, as well as another demonstration of the necessity to create a new international. Another element that supported this conclusion was the Stalin-Laval Pact, signed in Paris on the 2nd of May 1935, which was considered by the International Secretariat as a coup de grace to the Third International, a capitulation to the imperialistic world due to the weakening of the revolutionary pressure in the world. Footnote. Stalin has signed the death certificate of the Third International, an open letter to the world proletariat, 25th of May, 1935, Trotsky. Is there anything in this footnote that I can read? No, it's all in Italian or French. Anyway, end footnote. And the Stalin-Laval Pact is also known as the Franco-Soviet Treaty of Mutual Assistance. The Franco-Soviet Treaty of Mutual Assistance was a bilateral treaty between France and the Soviet Union with the aim of enveloping Nazi Germany in 1935 to reduce the threat from Central Europe. The Franco-Soviet Treaty of Mutual Assistance was pursued by Maxim Litvinov, the Soviet Foreign Minister, and Louis Barthou, the French Foreign Minister, who was assassinated in October 1934 before negotiations had been finished. Louis Barthou's successor, Pierre Laval, was skeptical of the desirability and of the value of an alliance with the Soviet Union. However, after the declaration of German rearmament in March 1935, the French government forced the reluctant foreign minister to complete the arrangements with Moscow that Bartu had begun. Back to the text. According to one of the main international secretariat leaders, Leonetti, the pact demonstrated that at this point Stalin only acted in order to fulfill Soviet interests and not also those of the international workers' movement. Sorry. I was saying if there's anything for Leonetti. I can't really find anything. According to one of the main international secretariat leaders, Alfonso Leonetti, the pact demonstrated that at this point Stalin only acted in order to fulfill Soviet interests and not also those of the international workers' movement. Moreover, Leonetti pointed out that the agreement was unnecessary because in 1935 the Soviet Union was not still a, quote, besieged fortress by imperialism, and the hypothesis of a revolutionary outcome of European masses' radicalization, parenthesis, especially the French one, in parenthesis, was once again a concrete possibility. As stated by Alfonso Leonetti, that scenario represented a danger for Stalin's policy because it could have led to the rebirth of a new revolutionary center unaligned with Moscow. Consequently, the Soviet dictator had decided to sign that pact, which reinforced the bourgeoisie of France in place of France's proletariat. It says, is Milos Hayek clearly explained. And something, I can't read it all. It's in Italian. It says, let's see if I can actually copy and paste all this and put it into Google Translate. Italian to English. The quote translates according to Google Translate is this. It says, quote, and this is who? Milos Hayek, who was a Czech historian, politician, and Czechoslovak resistance fighter during the German occupation of Czechoslovakia. Hayek, who signed the Charter 77 Human Rights Manifesto in 1977, became the spokesman for the Charter 77 movement in 1988. Milos Hayek was born in Detenice, Czechoslovakia in 1921. In 1938, Nazi Germany began Nazi Germany's occupation of Czechoslovakia. Together with Milos Hayek's later wife Elena Haykova, Hayek became involved with the Czech resistance and other anti-Nazi groups to help Jews obtain hideouts and false identity papers during World War II. He was arrested by the Gestapo in August 1944 and sentenced to death in March 1945. However, Hayek's execution was not carried out before the Prague Uprising and the end of the German occupation, as was later. Milos Hayek was later honored as, quote, righteous among the nations by Israel for his work to save Jews during the Holocaust. Hayek became a member of the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia following the war, but opposed the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia's party leadership throughout the country's communist era. Milos Hayek broke with the party's leaders during the Prague Spring in 1968 to join the reformist movement. Milos Hayek was expelled from the Communist Party following the Warsaw Pact invasion of Czechoslovakia, which ended the Prague Spring. Milos Hayek was also fired from his job, but went into retirement because he had been a World War II resistance fighter, thanks to the help of his ex-wife. In 1977, Hayek joined the group of Czechoslovak dissidents, including Václav Havel, to sign the Charter 77 Human Rights Manifesto. Milos Hayek died in Prague on the 25th of February 2016 at the age of 94. His granddaughter Anna is a Holocaust historian at the University of Warwick. One second. And his quote says, I read the Wikipedia, now to read his quote. It says, quote, at the time of the, quote, theory of social fascism, end quote, Trotsky had subjected the orientation of the Comintern to severe criticism and had exalted as an alternative the policy of the United Front. As soon as the Communist International returned seriously to the policy of the United Front, expanding the policy of the United Front to a vast extent, Trotsky began to criticize the United Front from the left. Trotsky insisted on the categorical limits that had been drawn to the United Front at the beginning of the 1920s and condemned every case in which they were exceeded. Trotsky, moreover, had dissented in principle against the Popular Front. Trotsky defined the Popular Front as a coalition between the proletariat and the imperialist bourgeoisie, end quote. And again, that was Milos Hayek. End footnote. The attitude of the International Communist League had to adopt towards the Popular Front's policy, and especially towards the French one, split the International Secretariat. The issue was discussed during the session that took place in Paris on the 12th of July, 1935, in the presence of Martin, who is Alfonso Leonetti, Dubois, the German, Elfriede Eisler, alias Ruth Fischer, is that like Root Fisher? Okay, yeah, it is. I didn't know she was ever a part of the left opposition. Anyway, Clark, the French Jean Rousse, maybe it's Jean Roux. And who else are we seeing here? And Nicole, the German Irvin Wolf. It looks like Irvin Wolf was one of the people that the NKVD murdered. Anyway. Back to the text. Rue considered the front, quote, la renaissance de l'ancien cartel de gauche avait les mêmes combines d'illusions parlementaires et électorales. Let me try this one. Where am I? Roux considered the Popular Front, quote, and this is what Google Translate says, the rebirth of the old left-wing cartel with the same tricks of parliamentary and electoral illusions, end quote. Roux. And supported by Irvin Wolf, claimed that the International Communist League had to stand out as an enemy of the Front Populaire. And there's a footnote here. A former member of the SFIO, Roux, this is about Roux, in 1934, Roux joined the Ligue Communiste and became one of the leaders of French Trotskyism, whose moves Jean Roux followed until 1944, when he rejoined the SFIO until 1948, and then later from 1956 to 59, when he participated in the Parti Socialiste Autonome. Instead, in 1972, he joined the Parti Socialiste and became a member of its executive committee. End footnote. Instead, Alfonso Leonetti affirmed that, quote, again, this is in fucking French. Let me use the Google Translate again. The Popular Front is the only real movement at present. It exists. It cannot be fought. We must place ourselves on the basis of the Popular Front in order to transform the Popular Front by vigorous criticism, ... The petty bourgeois masses will turn to the fascists if they are not attracted by the action of the proletariat, ... We must develop, continue the movement, push the movement under the slogan, Popular Front to power, ... It is a question of fighting the union with the French Comintern, but also of concluding an alliance with it. End quote. And again, that quote was from Alfonso Leonetti. The Comintern was not thrown officially into the focus of the debates neither during the Conference for the Fourth International, organized by the International Communist League in Paris from the 29th to the 31st of July 1936, when this organization became the movement of the Fourth International, nor during the founding conference of the Fourth International, officially renamed World Party of Socialist Revolution, which took place in Périgny-sur-Yerres near Paris on the 3rd of September 1938. The Trotskyist reflectors enlightened it again after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed in Moscow on the 23rd of August 1939, which had been predicted by Trotsky already in 1933, although in broad terms. In 1939, Trotsky affirmed that the tactical, quote, zigzags caused by the Comintern incoherent the Comintern's incoherent policy produced only chaos within the working class and would have facilitated the victory of fascism in the upcoming war. Furthermore, Trotsky considered the Communist International, quote, the first victim of the German-Soviet pact, The Comintern is being forsaken from one side by the patriots and from the other by the internationalists, end quote. Moreover, according to Trotsky, the dissolution of the Comintern, an event that Trotsky believed inevitable, quote, will not fail to deal an irreparable blow to the authority of the ruling caste in the consciousness of the broad masses of the Soviet Union itself, end quote. Trotsky, Stalin, Hitler's quartermaster, published 2nd of September 1939. And footnote. Shortly before the beginning of the Second World War, the International Secretariat and also the International Executive Committee, IEC, elected during the founding conference, moved to New York, since by the end of the 30s, the main section of the Fourth International was the U.S. section, named Socialist Workers' Party, SWP. For this reason, the so-called Emergency Conference of the Fourth International took place in New York from the 19th to the 26th of May, 1940. The aim was to elect a new international direction, to give a first appraisal of the New World conflict, and to try to resolve the discussion which started inside the Socialist Workers' Party, where a minority led by Shachtman criticized the position of unconditional defense of the USSR, that the Fourth International kept defending despite the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Delegates representing the Argentine, Belgian, Canadian, Chilean, Cuban, German, Mexican, Puerto Rican, Spanish, and U.S. sections participated in the emergency conference. Where the Fourth International adopted a paper written by Trotsky and co-signed also by the main leaders of the Fourth International, the Manifesto of the Fourth International and the Imperialist War and the Proletarian World Revolution. The document stated that the Comintern policy, defined as, quote, a mixture of crude opportunism and unbridled adventurism, end quote, had carried out an influence on the working class which was, quote, even more demoralizing than the policy of its elder brother, the Second International, end quote. Furthermore, the manifesto condemned not only the turn carried out by the Comintern following the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, when it had, quote, suddenly discovered, the criminal imperialism of the Western democracies, end quote, but also the lack of a public stance made by the Comintern against the German invasion of Poland, Czechoslovakia, Denmark, and Norway. Following the dissolution of the Comintern, carried out in May 1943, the International Executive Committee provided another manifesto where it emphasized that the decision was taken by the Comintern and the leadership of the communist parties without consulting their membership. The choice was considered by the IEC, International Executive Committee, another demonstration of the real nature of the Comintern, quote, a totalitarian instrument in the hands of a clique, alien to the interests of a world proletariat, end quote. The dissolution was also defined as, quote, a vicious attack against proletarian internationalism, end quote, as well as the last demonstration of the Comintern subjugation to the desiderata of the Stalinist bureaucracy, which transformed it, quote, from an organization of world revolution into a mere instrument of Kremlin foreign policy, a mere bodyguard of the Soviet Union. End quote. According to the International Executive Committee, Stalin's decision to dissolve the Comintern was comparable to what the leaders of the Second International did concerning the Socialist International, and was also considered, quote, the latest episode in the Kremlin's concessions to the capitalist world, end quote. Therefore, after the dissolution, the International Executive Committee stated that there was only one communist international, the fourth, ready to lead the world proletariat, quote, for the world revolution, end quote. The only one labor international which had succeeded in surviving the world war since even the LSI, quote, had given no sign of life, lacking even the energy to bury itself, end quote. The Second World War made the contacts between the International Secretariat and the European sections very difficult. For this reason, in January 1942, the first European Secretariat was founded in the Belgian Ardennes in order to coordinate the activity of the European sections, and it was headquartered in Paris. In summer 1943, the European Secretariat was succeeded by another Secretariat, the Provisional European Secretariat, PES, led by Michel Pablo, the Greek, Michalis and Raptis, and also located in Paris. Also, the PES composed a manifesto concerning the dissolution of the Comintern. Again, the PES is the Provisional European Secretariat. In this document, the Provisional European Secretariat affirmed that Stalin had transformed the Comintern in, quote, un instrument passif dans les mains de Moscow, end quote, and allowed elements I'm going to repeat this. I'm going to have to translate this whole sentence. It says, in this document, it asserted that it affirmed that Stalin had transformed the Comintern into, quote, a passive instrument in the hands of Moscow, end quote, and allowed, quote, the most mediocre and servile elements, end quote, to manage the Comintern national sections. End footnote. Or not end footnote, or back to the text. In this way, the Comintern became a, quote, let me look this up again. A, quote, pure and simple diplomatic instrument whose orientation changes according to the Kremlin's torturous maneuvers, end quote. Stalin tried to justify in a Marxist-Leninist way his decision to dissolve the Comintern, but the Provisional European Secretariat considered Stalin's explanations cynical falsifications of history. According to it, in fact, a communist international was necessary, not only, quote, I'm going to get the translator out again. According to the Provisional European Secretariat. In fact, a communist international was necessary not only, quote, to establish in the struggle the unity of the proletariat of the different countries against the bourgeoisie, end quote, but also because, quote, in the era of financial capitalism, the organization of production forms a whole on a global scale, end quote. The Provisional European Secretariat considered what happened concerning the Comintern a Stalinist capitulation to U.S. imperialism, which aimed to wear out the revolutionary movement worldwide. Therefore, Stalin could be deemed as colluding with the imperialist and capitalist powers and therefore a traitor of the socialist cause. Moreover, the Provisional European Secretariat stated that the dissolution of the Comintern was the prologue to that of the communist parties, which would dissolve into the reformist ones despite the will of the masses. Ready to the revolutionary action in different countries. For this reason, they needed a genuine international revolutionary leadership, which at that time did not lack, according to the Provisional European Secretariat. It was, in fact, the Fourth International, ready to lead the world proletariat towards the world proletariat's emancipation and the construction of the United States of the world. New section, conclusion. As stated above, Trotsky and the International Secretariat tried to create a global network alternative to Stalinism, which meant since 1933 to the Comintern, with a specific ideological platform based especially on the theory of permanent revolution, the United Front policy, and the party democracy, which lacked, according to Trotsky, inside the Comintern and its sections. Moreover, Trotsky and Trotsky supporters considered the USSR a workers' state, although degenerated, to be defended to the bitter end, while the Stalinist propaganda painted the Trotskyists as enemies of the USSR and agents of fascism, as agents of Nazi fascism. But it was Stalin and not Trotsky who made a deal with Hitler. It was precisely this pact that exacerbated the contrast between the Third and Fourth International, because the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact obliged the Comintern to revise its politics towards Nazi Germany, a country which the international Trotskyist movement always considered the main enemy of the labor movement. Furthermore, the German-Soviet Pact marked an important occasion for the Fourth International to try to emerge as a real alternative to the Comintern due to the shock caused by the pact within international communism because of the already reminded change of judgment concerning Nazi Germany. Operation Barbarossa in June 1941 was what forced Stalin and the Comintern to carry out another, quote, turn, and to slowly come back to the anti-fascist policy. This change allowed Stalinism to confirm its consensus among international communism and its leadership on it, to the detriment of Trotskyism. The fall of the Comintern also seemed to open up a new favorable scenario for the Fourth International, but its rise to the leadership of the world proletariat did not happen due to the victory of the Soviet Union in the Second World War. This allowed the USSR to become a world power and therefore to present the USSR's policy and the USSR's, quote, version of communism as successful in the immediate post-war period, at the expense of the Fourth International, which instead remained a propaganda organization without a real influence over the masses, also due to the fact that it lacked a solid leadership with a prestige comparable to that of Trotsky. Of course, the Fourth International had leaders of great substance, like James Buchanan, Livia Maitan, and Ernest Mandel, to name but a few, but nobody succeeded in creating a solid and authoritative leadership, able to avoid other splits like the ones which happened in 1940 inside the main sections of the Fourth International, the Socialist Workers' Party, and those happened in 1953 and in 1962. Footnote: in November 1953, the majority of the French section, Parti Communiste Internationaliste, led by Pierre Lambert, the British section, quote, the Club, inside the Labour Party, led by Jerry Healy, the Swiss one, Sozialistischer Arbeiterbundes, and the Socialist Workers' Party split and established the International Committee of the Fourth International because they disagreed with Michel Pablo's policies carried out since the Third World Congress of the Fourth International, held in Paris in August 1951. Instead, in January 1962, some Latin American sections created a tendency, led by the Argentine Juan Posadas, Omero Romulo Cristalli Fresnelli, which split because it wanted the Fourth International to focus its policy, especially on the support of the colonial revolutions, a part of the secessionist organizations. The Socialist Workers' Party and the Swiss section joined again the Fourth International during its Seventh World Congress, held in Rome in June 1963. See Pierre Frank's The Long March of the Trotskyists, Contributions to the History of the Fourth International, published in 1969. End footnote. In conclusion, the competition with the Comintern, and since 1943, with the pro-Soviet communism, which since that year lacked an international organization, except for the Cominform, was always unbalanced at the expense of the Fourth International, due to the unlimited support that the Comintern received from the USSR, the notoriety of the Popular Front's policy, and the rise of the USSR to the rank of world power following its victory over Nazi fascism. Last but not least, the fact that no one of the parties linked to the Fourth International succeeded in taking the power and establish a solid government which could carry out the role that the USSR had towards the Comintern, was the gravest failure of the Fourth International, which remained a Catharism without its Albi, a, quote, heresy which lacked its own stronghold, unlike, for example, another, quote, heresy, Titoism, following the Stalin-Tito split of June 1948, which at first raised strong expectations within the Fourth International leadership. In fact, quote, per la prima volta si concretiziva. Fuck, I'm not even gonna try. Sorry, let me repeat that. Following the Stalin-Tito split of June 1948, which at first raised strong expectations within the Fourth International leadership, in fact, quote, for the first time, the possibility of giving a heresy a solid territorial base was realized, end quote. As Jose Pirjevic wrote. Let's see who he is. Jose Pirjevic was born in 1940, registered at birth Giuseppe Piolazzi because of the Italianization policy under the fascist regime. Is a Slovene-Italian historian and prominent diplomatic historian of the West Balkans region, as well as a member of the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts. Back to the text. Moreover, as stated by Paulo Spriano, Paulo Spriano lived from 1925 to 1988 and was an Italian historian of the Italian labor and communist movement. Moreover, as stated by Paulo Spriano, quote, an analogy with the Trotsky case and the fate of the Bolshevik oppositions of the 30s is not without its charm. If in 1936 to 38, in order to achieve his own personal tyranny, Stalin, quote, demonized Trotsky, now with June 1948, the devil becomes Tito. As was said then that Trotsky was no longer the supporter and symbol of a deviation of the movement of an error, but became the representative of an enemy class, an agent of fascism, a tool of foreign secret services. So very little time passes. In 1948, before the same label is attached to the leader of the Yugoslav communists, end quote. And that quote, again, is from Paulo Spriano. And that's the end of the piece. Thank you so much for listening. I know that was a little tricky to get through, but I hope you appreciate it. I did. Thank you.